Shabbat shalom, Shana tova, ki'ilu. For years, the 7-year-old's symptoms had stumped family doctors. He had developmental delays, decreased muscle tone, and a large skull, and several medical problems that just didn't seem to add up to a specific diagnosis. Now, in years past, his doctors would probably have explored various subtle variations from the norm in the length of the spacing between his eyes and ears and nose that might indicate a particular syndrome. Running tests and searching in medical journals might have taken days, if not weeks or longer. But today, searching for answers, the boy's doctors simply pulled out a smartphone and snapped a picture of his face. An artificial intelligence app called Face to Gene instantly analyzed 88 points on his face and ranked the likelihood of various genetic syndromes. It didn't and it doesn't give an exact diagnosis, but it did offer answers to consider and made the diagnosis much quicker. Our faces reveal so much. They might tell a person's ethnic background, their age, or their mood, but new technology can see much, much more. Developed by AI researchers, they analyze thousands of facial features such as wrinkles and skin texture and face symmetry to examine a person's overall health and even their potential lifespan. Now, I don't know what they do with gray hair. I haven't taken the test yet, but I find this technology amazing. It sounds like something from the future that surely we will increasingly employ in the years to come. Yaakov Avinu, Jacob, lived long before AI and before apps, but apparently he had his own kind of facial recognition system. It didn't examine physical health so much as moral health. And I want to suggest that it is a system we would do well to employ in the year and the years to come. Our rabbis teach that Yaakov Avinu had Ruach HaKodesh. He had a Holy Spirit that gave him special insight into people just by looking at them. We read about it in our Parsha, in that long-awaited reunion when Jacob finally sees the face of his beloved son, Yosef. Now, to set the scene, recall that we know something about Yosef's appearance. Earlier, the Torah reported that Joseph was handsome, Yafeh Mar'eh Yafeh Toar. Now, this is the exact same language used to describe his mother, Rachel. So perhaps it suggests that they look something alike. After being sold down to and living in Egypt, Joseph started dressing and looking like the locals, so much so that when his brothers first saw their brother Joseph, they didn't recognize him. Finally, in our Parsha, Joseph reveals himself. He says to his brother, "I'm your brother Joseph." But his brothers could hardly respond, "Ki nivhalu mipanav." Now, it's translated in our Chumashim as they were dumbfounded on account of him, or they were frightened by his presence. But panav refers to Joseph's face. They were confused by his face, by his appearance. And we can understand why. Using their facial recognition system, something was not adding up. First, their brother was long gone, presumed dead. And while, yes, this person kind of looked like their brother, he talked like an Egyptian. He dressed like an Egyptian. He walked like an Egyptian. So naturally, they were dumbfounded by his face. That's because they couldn't see beyond skin deep. Not so with Yaakov, with Jacob. By the time Jacob came down to Egypt, he had been told that his beloved son Joseph was alive, but he still couldn't believe it until he saw it with his own eyes. Listen to how the Torah describes the scene. After Jacob and Joseph hugged and kissed, Jacob said to Joseph, "Now I can die, for I have seen your face, that you are alive. Acharei ro'iti et panecha ki odcha chai." Jacob had to see Joseph with his own eyes to believe that he was alive. Ra'oti ki odcha chai means, I've seen that you are chai, that you are alive. But Jacob's description of Joseph being chai, being alive, is more than a biological diagnosis. The Or HaChaim, Chaim ibn Alter, a 17th century Moroccan Torah commentator, explains as follows. When Jacob heard that Joseph was alive in Egypt, he was of course thrilled, but he was also worried. He was afraid that Joseph was no longer himself. Rather, by this point, that Joseph had lived in Egypt many years, first enslaved to Pharaoh and then serving as Pharaoh's right-hand man, that he had been elevated from dungeon up to the heights of power, but that this Joseph looked and sounded like an Egyptian, that he was essentially Egyptian. That is what worried Jacob. Consider that in Jewish thought, Egypt is the epitome of tuma, of impurity, and of immorality. It's a place of violence and of suffering, a place where a state's power will be used to subjugate people, where wealth was prized above human dignity. And so Jacob was afraid that his son Joseph would be more Egyptian than Jewish at this point. But with Ruach HaKodesh, he saw the real Yosef. He saw that Jacob was alive not just physically, but spiritually and morally. Joseph held on to his Jewish identity and his moral compass. The Or HaChaim writes, "We have numerous examples in the Bible of people being able to tell merely by looking at the faces of others that such people are upright and righteous." Jacob, it seems, used facial recognition to identify that standing before him was Yosef HaTzadik, Joseph the righteous. He saw that Joseph who had refused advances of Potiphar's wife, that Joseph who forgave his brothers who had sold him into slavery. He saw the Joseph who never told his father what his brothers had done. He saw the Joseph who had saved his family and all of Egypt from famine. That is to say, he saw a now more mature Joseph who had demonstrated self-control, generosity of spirit, kindness, and concern for others. Jacob saw in Yosef tzedek, righteousness. Now, I know that most of us don't have X-ray vision. Neither are we imbued with Ruach HaKodesh, and we should be hesitant to judge other people by looks alone. But really, the message of the Or HaChaim is not about facial recognition. It's about what constitutes Chaim, life. To be sure, we are to guard our health, striving to live healthy lives. But there is also such thing as moral health. Quoting the Talmud, the Or HaChaim reminds us, the wicked are called dead even in their lifetime, while the righteous are called alive even after their death. Ki tzadikim kruim chayim. What awaits us in 2025 in America, in Israel, and around the world? I fear, as we've already seen in the very first day of this new year, I fear the physical violence and death that sometimes seems to engulf our world. I also worry about those impurities, moral decay, misuse of power, corruption of values that threaten to shorten our lifespan. Like Yosef in Egypt, we are called upon to retain our strong moral core, even and especially when others seem to abandon theirs. We're called upon to live up to our highest values, to live lives of righteousness, to demonstrate self-control, generosity of spirit, to show kindness and concern for others. Though others may lower themselves to the lowest rungs of Tuma, we are to be upright. One of my favorite verses in our davening appears at the end of the Amida, where we seem to employ facial recognition to describe God's face. Barcheinu avinu kulanu ke'echad be'or panecha. We say, bless us, God, with or panecha, the light of your face. God's face, we declare, is a light that illumines our lives. Ki be'or panecha natata lanu Torat chaim ba'avat chesed u'tzedakah uvracha v'rachamim v'chayim v'shalom. It illumines our lives with the teachings about life, Torat chaim, with kindness, with righteousness, with blessings, with compassion, with life, and with peace. God's face radiates these qualities to us, and we are, in turn, to live them, to embody them. Though Hanukkah is over and the candles put away, I pray that the light from God's face shines through us in our deeds that we perform, in the principles that we uphold, and perhaps even in the very light of our countenance. Shabbat Shalom.